hopefully, I don't get too annoyed by my own froggy voice. I am going to present today on providing an overview of our function-based rapid stream assessment. So I think, in writing the user manual, we had to write out function-based rapid stream assessment a lot, and I just started saying FBRSA so that I would write the acronym out correctly, and it's caught on. I'm really excited that, the previous presenters are also calling it the FBRSA. Sometimes I think of Bertha as I say it. But we're going to jump into our specific assessment. And first to note is that it is an update from the 2015 FBRSA. So the 2015 FBRSA had three components. It had a rapid reach level assessment that followed kind of an RBP format, but it also had a watershed assessment and project evaluation. The original assessment did not have numeric scoring, but did have narrative buckets for scoring. So using that functioning like a reference condition, functioning at risk or not functioning. There was a lot of detail in that original document on project evaluation, design approach, watershed setting. And for our updated FBRSA, the 2024, we narrowed the focus to really focus in on just the assessment and the role that that assessment plays within the 404 program. So that's why Nick started today off with that MSMF presentation, so that we can focus on what the FBRSA was developed to do, which is provide that quantitative or provide that stream assessment input, that stream quality input into the MSMF calculator. There are two pieces to the 2024 FBRSA. So there is what's the physical assessment or the reach level assessment. That is the rapid one that we are going to go out into the field and practice, and that most of today our presentations are going to be about this rapid assessment. And then there's also the MBSS assessment, and I have a couple slides on that, but just as has been noted and will be noted before, the Maryland Biological Stream Survey, so that's what MBSS. It is a rapid biological sampling method and processing program that is developed and run by DNR. So we are not the right folks to teach that training, but as a rapid because it is a rapid assessment and assesses that, top rung of the stream functions pyramid, that top category, it has been included in the 2024 FBRSA. For both the 2015 and the 2024, I don't know that I can say this enough, and hopefully I will say it multiple times in this presentation, but because these are rapid assessments, they require experienced personnel in order to provide verifiable and repeatable results. So both the reach scale, the physical assessment component, and the MBSS assessment component, they require training. They are not something to just pick up when you're brand new to stream restoration, like fresh out of college or fresh out of high school, read the manual and go out and do it. Like, it does take practice in order to provide repeatable results. So why did we update the 2020 or the 2015 FBRSA? We had three primary goals as we took a look at that rapid stream reach level assessment that we wanted to update for use today. And that is, we wanted to accurately estimate the change in stream quality for direct application into that MSMF calculator. We wanted the metrics to apply to a wide range of stream types and restoration design methods, and we wanted to keep the assessment rapid. And it is to say that, so the RSA, the physical assessment component, is qualitative and rapid, and just to say that the MBSS component is quantitative, but is considered a rapid biological sampling method. All right, so there are two pieces to the 2024 FBRSA. There's the physical assessment, which accounts for 65% of your combined score. And then there's the biological component, the MBSS score, and that accounts for 35% of your combined score. So you can see that there is a place to assess both your existing condition and your proposed. So existing being your pre-project condition and your proposed being your post-project condition. And your combined score is 65% of your physical score and 35% your biology score. The MBSS component consists of a maximum of 4 metrics, but a minimum of 2 metrics, whereas Rich listed 11 metrics as part of this physical assessment or the rapid stream assessment. So 2 of those metrics are only applicable in some circumstances. And similarly for MBSS, 2 of those metrics are only applicable to some sites. And it is important to note that those metrics that are just not applicable to your site do not count against you. So if you have a site that just naturally does not support a fish assemblage, then your MBSS score is not lower because of that. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about individual metrics too. So for that physical assessment, the RSA assessment, there are 11 metrics listed out here that Rich also had listed. And just to note, the 2 that are not applicable to all sites, the first one's going to be metric R5, which is your velocity and depth diversity metric. And metric R5 is applicable to perennial streams and is not applicable to intermittent streams. And as we're applying that one in the field, you'll see that you need to have enough energy, you need to have enough flow to form diverse bed forms. So that is why metric R5 is not applicable to intermittent streams. And then metric R9 is only applicable to streams that naturally support or could support a stream wetland complex. So metric 9 is floodplain soil drainage. And that was a part of water quality that Rich assessed before or discussed in his presentation. Where we're looking at that lateral hypereic exchange. And that is just not a component of all stream systems. So only where that stream and the valley could naturally support a stream wetland complex is that metric applicable. And I'll pause for a second. Are there any questions as I take a drink of water?
So Sydney, if there's a minimum number of metrics that must be assessed, does the Corps require the assessing everything that can be assessed that applies, or can you a la carte kind of say, well, these are the important ones, these are the ones I'm going to focus on, and even though I could assess a couple, I'm not going to save cost or time?
Yeah, so
Nope.
that would be a
Require them
set.
all.
Yeah, it would be all of them that are applicable. So for a perennial stream, you generally a perennial stream in an alluvial valley, you'd be assessing all of these in the physical assessment and probably both bugs and fish. For intermittent streams, you would not be looking at fish, and you also wouldn't look at velocity depth diversity because that one just wouldn't work. And then if you're in a V-shaped, like a colluvial valley where you just wouldn't naturally have a stream wetland complex scenario, then you wouldn't look at floodplain soil drainage.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for that. It gave me the opportunity to turn my microphone off for a second. Thank you, Nick. And Nick mentioned, and I mentioned on 2 slides before, so the MBSS scoring, that fish are not applicable. So if your drainage area is less than 0.5 square miles, then the fish IBIs are not applicable to your site, and your MBSS portion of your scoring, so that 35% of your combined score, is only going to be out of the 2 benthic metrics that are included in the MBSS portion of the scoring. So the fish don't count against you. But if your site is greater than 0.5 square miles drainage area, then you will assess all 4. In terms of the 2 components, we do have slightly different scoring criteria and narrative rankings, but just with good, fair, poor being pretty standard in the biological realm, of good condition being streams that are minimally impacted and are what are considered reference standard streams. So for the MBSS metrics, those come published with their own range of scoring, which is from 1 to 5. So anything scoring from 4 to 5 is what is considered good condition or functioning similar to a reference condition stream, whereas anything less than 3 is going to be that poor condition. So those are the MBSS metrics. And then our rapid stream assessment metrics, so our physical assessment, takes that scale and goes 1 to 10 and uses the narrative descriptions of functioning, similar to a reference condition, or not functioning, similar to a reference condition. Rich already kind of laid the groundwork for this one so that I don't have to spend a lot of time on this slide, but the assessment is based on the stream function pyramid framework. So we looked at each of the 5 functional categories and the functional statements that describe the categories and considered parameters that are important to streams across Maryland and different design restoration approaches, and selected metrics that assess, that quantify that function-based parameter, those function-based parameters. And then applied reference standards. So looking at that scale of good, fair, poor, or functioning, functioning at risk, not functioning. And just to note that the 2024 FBRSA does not include assessment of hydrology as a functional category, but does include assessments for hydraulic, geomorphic, physicochemical, and biology functions. All right. Steps. Back to not to a checklist, but I like steps. I like numbered steps. Like, this is where we're going to start. So we're going to start with a reach delineation because this assessment is a reach scale assessment. Then we're going to complete the pre-visit site tasks, which are outlined in the desktop values section of that workbook. The workbook that is the 2024 FBRSA. And then I've lumped these two together. So there's collect the rapid stream assessment data and determine the existing and proposed scores for the rapid stream assessment. So that's the physical piece. And then 5 and 6 are collect the MBSS data and determine those existing and proposed condition scores. Now it is possible for you to do one single field visit and collect both the RSA data and the MBSS visit when your site is smaller than half the square mile drainage area. But due to the sampling requirements of the MBSS, if you are doing both fish and bugs, then you will need to do 2 site visits. So macroinvertebrates are assessed in the spring and fish are assessed in the summer. In terms of the physical assessment, it can be assessed at, in terms of the physical assessment, it is best to assess in the summer season. However, you can assess it at any time of year, but it is very important that you go back and do repeat assessments. So when you're doing monitoring of the assessments, you need to come back at the same time every year. So if you had to do this assessment for the pre-project condition in the winter, then every time you go back to do the monitoring assessments, you have to go back in the winter as well, so that you are always assessing that condition, that season of score. All right, I'm actually going to start with 5 and 6, and then I'm going to jump back up to the top here. And I'll start with 5 and 6 so that I can provide you with a link. And hopefully it's a clickable link when we made the PDFs of our slides. And you can go to the DNR website. For the MBSS component, you are required to have certification that is run through MBSS. So we will not be certifying an MBSS data collection or processing for this training. But refer to MBSS. Now we'll jump back up to the top. Okay, reach delineation is step 1. So before you perform your reach breaks for any assessment, I don't know how many stream assessments you guys use, but you have to know what that assessment is assessing, what is being assessed, so that you know where you can lump conditions together and where there's a distinct change that would indicate a change in your scoring. So the 2024 FBRSA primarily assesses your in-stream conditions. There are 2 exceptions to that. So metric R8, which is the entrenchment ratio, and metric R11, which is floodplain exclusions. Those 2 do assess what is how wide is your flood prone width, and also what is within your floodplain that is, man-made, excluding that floodplain. As noted earlier, the vegetation community is assessed separately using the stream buffer quality assessment, and that is entered separately into the MSMF calculator. So I would never ever say that riparian vegetation is not important. It is critically important and necessary, and at least for this method, it is assessed in a different assessment. So it does sit outside of this assessment. For this particular project, we have a reach that starts at the bridge and ends at the tree line, which is also the property line. And it extends laterally to include the floodplain. When you are breaking reach breaks, you should look for changes in drainage area, stream type, valley type, stability condition, bed material composition, generally where in-channel conditions or floodplain width are distinct or have changed. And just to note, a large project, because a lot of projects these days are large and getting larger, will be subdivided into multiple reaches, and each one of those reaches requires its own assessment. And just to show that at a specific project, which is actually still a pretty small project, but it would take too long to talk through a really big one. So we're going to talk through this small project, but that does have distinct reach conditions. So this stream has been channelized throughout its valley in order to maximize agricultural practices. The stream condition on this main stem, oh, I should note, it is a 0.9 square mile drainage area up here at the culvert. The stream condition throughout the pasture is consistent, but where this tributary comes in, the channel is larger downstream of that tributary. So if it's 0.9 at the culvert, this tributary is 0.6 square mile drainage area. So downstream of this confluence, the stream is 1.5 square mile drainage area. So even though
Direction of
conditions are
flow is
consistent-
from the road to the east.
Yes. Yeah, direction of flow is heading that way to the east. And the tributary coming in is also a very similar condition, but it is its own stream channel, so it is also a separate and distinct reach. So just within our pasture area, we've got 3 reaches broken out. The site topography, you guys can see that up in the pastures, we've got some pretty expansive wetlands within the valley. As we move kind of southeast, the valley confines, and there's actually bedrock down here with a little bit of bedrock control in what is this green section and a lot of bedrock control in this purple section. So this example has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reaches broken out due to conditions or due to site conditions. This is a slide that I'm not going to read, but it's kind of like your money slide for reference when you're thinking about reach breaks and where to break a reach. And Rich mentioned the Castro and Thorn and that stream evolution triangle, and thinking about the valley setting, thinking about stream conditions, and thinking about the process drivers for your site. I do list riparian vegetation community here, and even though it is assessed in a separate condition, there's a lot of times where different property management practices can lead to differences in your stream conditions. So even though the floodplain veg is assessed separately from this assessment, it can mean there's a different stability condition in your channel if your veg community changes. And also particularly for debits and for impacts. So where you are proposing impacts, the scale of your proposed activity, or there might be a similar stream condition, but your proposed activity, impact activity, would differ. So you would have a reach break so that you could distinguish the proposed conditions. So you might have a culvert, and then you might also have like a riprap or contraction section leading into that culvert. And those are 2 separate impact activities that would have different proposed conditions for the site. Hearing no questions, we'll move on to step 2. Step 2, we're going to look at our pre-visit site tasks. So I love Rich's slide that said, like, before you start on restoration or embark on restoration, you want to understand those 4 components, which were flow regime, sediment supply, water quality. Oh, and I'm going to blank on the 4th one. That's all right. But
landscape connectivity.
Landscape connectivity. Yes. Thank you. So this part of the 2024 FBRSA is where we're going to record some of that data. Not all of that data, but some of that data. So step one is to gather topography data, floodplain mapping, land use, land cover, historic imagery so that you know what has gone on at the site that has led to the current conditions, and also soils data. A lot of this data is available from the Maryland Watershed Resources Registry, and that is the shot on the right here is a snapshot of that Maryland Watershed Resources Registry. And I've worked in a lot of different states, and I appreciate it so much when a state has like a wonderful like online mapping tool. And you guys are lucky to be working in a state that has such a comprehensive mapping tool available. All right, so step one is you're going to delineate your watershed. As Nick noted, you're going to delineate the drainage area to the center of your reach. That is the latitude and longitude required in the MSMF. And the drainage area is going to be to the center of your reach. That is enough information for you to determine whether or not the fish IBI is going to be applicable. For this worksheet, data that is entered into this desktop values section is going to determine your scoring. So as we noted, if the fish IBI is not applicable, then there's two metrics that are removed from your scoring. So if this box has an N in it for no, not applicable, then the scoring changes on the scoring spreadsheet. This drainage area might also be enough information for you to determine whether your stream is likely perennial. So if you're, in a very large, 5 square mile drainage area, there's no question that is a perennial stream. You're also going to look at either from stream stats, which you use to delineate your drainage area, or you can use a newer tool called, I think, Map My Watershed, and determine your land uses that are coming in as well. And so this feeds into like understanding your flow regime. So we require % impervious and % forested for that catchment so that we can understand the flows, flashiness, but also water quality that's coming into your reach. Impervious cover. So don't skip entering your watershed data. So that impervious cover and % forested, as noted, it does have to do with your stream flows that are coming in, how flashy the watershed is. So the more impervious cover you have in your watershed, the more likely your stream is degraded. But also an important note, and Nick will talk about it more when we get to the specific metrics, but if you have more than 10% impervious cover, there is a metric scoring rule for metric R1, and that one is our water quality metric that Nick will talk about. So these data are necessary for completing your assessment. Next step, you're going to look at your site terrain. So gather the best topography data that you have, and we are going to determine what your valley type is and start to get clues as to whether or not your valley could support a stream wetland complex. This, you're going to determine your valley type, but also determine the active valley bottom. So in order to do metric R11, which is anthropogenic floodplain exclusions, you have to map your active valley bottom. And I'll talk more about that, but just know that this may require historic imagery if you have a lot of development that is in your floodplain. But flood mapping, so FEMA flood maps can also provide a look at the valley shape or how wide the valley is, and also soils data can help with determining your unaltered valley. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So the first step is valley type. So you want to determine whether your valley is primarily formed by sediment that's coming off of the hill slope. So hill slope erosion processes, these are usually V-shaped or U-shaped valleys. They're pretty narrow, and they naturally just have a more narrow floodplain or flood-prone bench. Alluvial valleys are primarily formed by the deposition of sediment. So with the river depositing sediments during those overbank flow events, and they're generally wider and lower gradient than the colluvial valleys. We do make a distinction between unconfined alluvial valleys and confined alluvial valleys. I like to use this number of 7. So if the valley width is greater than 7 times your bank full width, then that is what's considered an unconfined alluvial valley. Whereas more in like ridge and valley provinces, you might have naturally confined alluvial valleys, or we see confined alluvial valleys a lot in urban settings where urban development has encroached on that unconfined valley and restricted the valley shape. All right, where I was jumping ahead to, because I just really wanted to talk to you guys about that active valley bottom. So the active valley bottom is needed for floodplain exclusion metric, which is metric R11. That metric is applicable to all streams. So you will always need to do this activity and determine what is your active valley bottom, which is the area extending laterally from the channel that would be inundated during a 100-year flood event in the absence of human encroachment. So what is your floodplain in the absence of human encroachment? So for alluvial rivers, the natural floodplain is likely characterized as the valley bottom. So that could be from hill slope to hill slope, or in this case, there's a natural terrace that is formed. So the active valley bottom is from the toe of that terrace to the toe of the hill slope on the right. In a floodplain or a valley where people have messed with it, determining what the valley shape before people messed with it can be difficult. So in this particular case, where there's a photo in the manual where it's showing like a road is occupying, you know, almost the whole valley bottom except for where the stream channel lives. For this particular example, I continued the slope down from the hill slope to estimate what the active valley bottom was. This is where historic aerial imagery, or if there's even historic topography data, can be helpful in determining what your active valley bottom is. All right, we're making progress. We're filling things in. Oh, I did not mention, but this is being filled out with data from one of the sites that we will be visiting on your field day. So Mingo Creek has a drainage area of 0.78 square miles. It has about 3% impervious cover, or 2 to 4. 72% of the watershed is forested. The next step that we are going to
Can I ask a
in.
quick question?
Oh yeah,
I'm sorry. Can you go back to the active valley bottom, stream valley bottom?
the one
So-
people messed with, or the other one?
Yes, no, this one. So
Okay.
can you just help me understand if there is a road there or whatever, what are we getting from the historical? How is that helping us with this assessment? And if I'm thinking from the perspective of a existing project or something that, you know, our clients want to do, why does this matter, I guess? Does that make sense?
I think so. Yes. Historical imagery, if you have imagery from before the road, so let's just say this anthropogenic terrace is a road. So if you have imagery from before the road was installed, that will help you determine where that toe of slope would have been or was before the road went in. And it matters in terms of that reference condition that we want to score streams against. So I often find this really helpful to think of in terms of thinking of this tool or this assessment being used for both debits and credits. So when that road went in, it cut off part of that floodplain for this stream, for this valley. You coming in later and performing restoration, you could remove that road if that is feasible, but we all know removing roads is not a typical activity, right? Like usually we're not going in and able to like clear that out, but just recognizing that that stream has kind of already been messed with and it's already departed from its reference condition affects the scoring. So it makes sure that when we assess debits and credits and when you're assessing your existing and proposed condition, when you're doing debits, but also when you're doing restoration later, that everybody is using the same measuring stick of what was referenced for that stream.
Okay.
Did that help?
This-
Did I say
for
that
this-
clearly?
For this metric specifically too, it also applies to a higher level analysis that we do on mitigation projects, which is a site evaluation report. It affects your scoring and your final crediting. And in this case, let's say there was a road here, or even in some places I've worked in East Kentucky, there'd be a town on the terrace, and it might push you away from working there on the site if you can't remedy that situation, get adequate floodplain. Well, maybe you don't need that whole historic active valley bottom to get something in your scoring for that metric. If you get a large enough percentage of it, your score is still pretty good. But if it's impacting, if it's crunching you down too much, you're in a really risky situation, and the stream can't function as it's supposed to because it can't access its full historic floodplain, or at least enough of it to be stable.
All right, our next step is soils data. So with the soils data, you'll fill out a pretty good chunk of this desktop values section in that worksheet. This data will help you to determine if metric R9, so that's your floodplain soil drainage. So this question, does the valley naturally support a stream wetland complex? So we already have part of that question, and that can come from valley type. So alluvial valleys are much more likely to support a stream wetland complex, but it also matters what the underlying soils are. So for Mingo Creek, we have those Cadorus silt loam soil profile, which has a depth to groundwater table of 18 to 13 inches, and it is not a hydric soil, at least from the Web Soil Survey, which can help us. Well, actually, let's go back for a second. So already I picked the step pool, the steep section of Mingo Creek, because it's really pretty up there for my example purpose. So we're already not in the right valley type, and our soil survey is telling us it's not a hydrically mapped soil. So this would say that this valley is not likely or does not naturally support a stream wetland complex. So that one would be an answer of no. We do not require, but we have input spots for your soil depth range and your texture. So for sites where metric 9 is applicable, and we will talk more about metric 9 later, I promise, you do need to assess your soil texture. So I being an H&H engineer, am still working on my ability to tell the difference between like a silty clay loam and a silty loam. But having the Web Soil Survey data out there can help me determine if there is something that should be kind of have that gravel component to it, or if the mapped Web Soil Survey is a silt loam versus a silty clay loam is good information to have. All right, so this is kind of a recap slide of how far we've come. So we have determined if the fish metrics are applicable using our drainage area. Without a site visit, we might not know flow duration. So it may be obvious if our drainage area is big enough. If it's not, if it's kind of on that cusp between intermittent and perennial, we will need a site visit to determine if metric 5 is applicable. And then for metric 9, that is the floodplain soil drainage, we want to use site terrain data, available wetland mapping, valley type, soil data to answer that question of could this valley naturally support or historically supported a stream wetland complex? And a reminder, so that I say it multiple times, that metrics that are not applicable to the site are removed from scoring. Next step on our sheet is determining the physiographic province for the site. So generally lumped into what is the coastal plain, the Piedmont, or the mountain region of the state of Maryland. This is important for two reasons. And the first reason is going to be how you calculate your IBI metrics. So whether or not what physiographic province you are in determines what metrics are used to calculate your IBI and also the scoring criteria for the IBI, because your bug and fish communities vary based on your region or your physiographic province. And the second component is for bankful validation. So selecting the regional curve that is applicable for your physiographic province. So you guys have plethora, lots of data, published regional curves that are available. So there's a Piedmont, a coastal plain, an Allegheny Plateau Ridge and Valley. So that's the mountain ones. But you also have what is, I believe it's the urban Piedmont curve. And then there's also a section that overlaps with Pennsylvania that might have a lot of karst topography in play. And then there's a citation below for a recent publication in 2021 that actually includes more smaller drainage areas, because I know a lot of the sites that we're working in these days can have a pretty small drainage area. So some data that was supplemented for the Piedmont U.S. Fish and Wildlife curve, data were collected in the Piedmont of Virginia that helped add to that curve. And those are the regional curves that are shown here. I will talk more about bankful verification when we get into metrics 6 to 11 after lunch today. And there was one question in the last time we presented of like, how much karst is enough karst? And I don't remember the answer, but I do remember that the answer is in this published paper of like what they use to develop that regional curve. So a karst landscape being one that is losing water to the karst geology that is underlying it. In terms of your desktop values on your summary worksheet, you're going to determine which regional curve is applicable to your project site and then fill in the calculated bankful area, bankful width, and bankful depth. These data are only needed for metrics 7, 8, and 10. So 7 is bank height ratio, 8 is entrenchment ratio, and 10 is your lateral stability metric, so the B-high. And this part, at least, is an office determination so that you have this data ready when you're out in the field looking for bankful indicators. Yay! Everybody do a dance. We've got a completed desktop value section, except I forgot to fill in the no on this one. Does the valley naturally support a stream wetland complex? But on that, we completed this section. So back to our steps for completing the 2024 FBRSA. Actually, let me check time really quick. I'm doing all right. The next steps are to collect that rapid data. That is what we are going to be doing in the field either tomorrow or Friday this week with you guys, and determining the existing and proposed scores at a site. And Nick's presentation after lunch will cover some of the metrics, and then my presentation will cover the rest of the metrics. And I already talked earlier that the MBSS portion of this requires DNR training and certification. The rapid stream assessment component of this is designed intentionally to accommodate a broad range of users. But just to say it once, everyone can hear me, everyone in the back can hear me, that because it is a rapid assessment, you do need well-experienced practitioners, and we do need multiple skill sets. So training in aquatic ecology and an understanding of valuable habitats to aquatic fauna is going to serve you very well in assessing our habitat metrics. Assessors must be knowledgeable in fluvial, geomorphic, and watershed processes and trained in assessing these processes. And more specifically for that one, we do not require survey data be collected. There are measurements that require an understanding of how survey data is collected, and using like a hand level and a rod to collect like a bank height measurement. We do need to know soil texture classes and to be able to identify them in the field. So again, I cannot do this RSA by myself. We need a team of 2, maybe 3 people, because I am not the best at soil textures. And then we also need to be able to identify and verify bankful. So send out the people who are experienced in these, along with the people who are learning these skills. Oh yeah, minimum of 2 people. Hey, I had it in a little pop-up box. Yeah. Do not go and do these stream assessments by yourself. That is unsafe and not advisable. All right, your first look at the metrics that are in this rapid stream assessment. So I've got metric 2 here as an example. And for each metric, there is a metric name. So in this case, it's channel shading. It will identify the function-based parameter that is quantified by the metric and also the functional category that is assessed that this parameter and metric are informing. Actually make that one go back away. We have applicability clearly noted. So again, 9 of the metrics are applicable to all streams. Only 2 of them have limited applicability, and we've put that up top so that you know when you need to or don't need to be assessing each metric. We include a purpose, the materials needed, and then instructions. And then down at the bottom is scoring, so that reference standard scoring. There's descriptions, or in this case for channel shading, you're using a densiometer to measure channel shading, and you'll have an average value at the end that you will use to select your existing condition score. And you'll make notes, so you'll record the data. I don't want to go too far in the way. I was about to say, these are the instructions for channel shading, but Nick is going to do that later. So just note, we will assess, measure the existing condition, and you will predict the proposed condition. Both scores, so both the existing condition score and the proposed condition score, require notes. So I want everybody, I don't know if you have a printed paper or whatever is nearby, just write down so you remember that notes are required for every metric and every value score that you write down in the field. All right, this is my last slide. So just to put a picture to it, because we're about to go further into the weeds. And before we go further into the weeds of each individual metric and the scoring, I want to show you pictures of a site that we performed the rapid stream assessment on and the scoring that they yielded. So this is a very small drainage area. Only 0.1 square miles is feeding this stream. And in the upstream reach, where it is connected to its floodplain, this reach scored 75%. So assessing the metrics that were applicable to the site, this stream scored 75% of their rapid stream assessment. Whereas the downstream reach, we have some head cuts that are making their way up through it. And it is just not as picturesque and a little more rough looking. And this stream reach scored 40% for the metrics that were applicable for the stream. Any questions?
What would be a good percentage for scoring? I know 75 sounds better than 40, but where would you eyeball it?
Ooh, greater than 70% is generally considered reference standard. So let's see if I can exit and go back. Oh no. Always dangerous. I will go back. So each of the metrics, here we go, is evaluated. So this would say 80%. 80% to 100% is what's considered functioning like a reference condition, but in between that 7 and the 8, so 75%, I would still consider the low end of what is functioning similar to a reference condition.
Hey, Sydney, can I ask a couple questions related to drainage area?
Sure.
So I threw this in the chat, but can you explain the rationale behind using the midpoint of the reach to delineate the drainage area?
Kick it to Nick.
Yeah, so we're trying to get the typical condition because it's projecting your width, your channel width. So if you have a long reach and you take it from the bottom, it's going to project a larger width. So we're trying to get about the average width of the channel because it does affect your multiplier in the larger stream framework. And then also, you want the closest to, the median average for your reach assessment as you're going upstream to downstream. when you're looking at bankful.
Okay, we should chat a little bit more about that, Nick, but thanks for the explanation. The other one is less than half a square mile, we're not looking at fish metrics. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes,
Correct.
less than half a square mile, you're not looking at the fish metrics. The reason is, even though it might have fish in it, the DNR opined fisheries that, you know, the IBIs weren't reliable when you get to streams smaller than half a square mile. So those less than a half a square mile, you wouldn't do it. Any place where you have a natural break where you just aren't going to have fish upstream, like a big bedrock drop or something like that, you wouldn't assess it. You would assess it if the impairment was caused by people, so a culvert and fish aren't getting upstream. And then, of course, intermittent streams, you would not be looking at fish. Of course, those are hopefully mostly under 5 square mile drainage area. Occasionally, you do get a big drainage area with an intermittent stream in karst areas or something.
Well, I guess not to get too much in the weeds here, but I guess I was thinking of a situation where you might be working on a trout stream and you would have a tributary that might be less than half a square mile. And if you want to show utilization of young of year in your proposed conditions, right? Wouldn't you, how would you handle that? Does that then become a case by case basis on whether you would score that or not? If you thought you could show pretty substantial uplift.
That's a tricky scenario. I think you just wouldn't assess fish on it, but we could discuss more, you know, in detail on that case. Just because of, you know, DNR's feedback that the IBI, which is one of the main metrics, it's abundance per, you know, linear foot or something like that, and then the other metric for fish is the IBI score. And DNR said the IBI score is not going to show accurate IBI numbers in the drainage areas below a half a square mile. So in general, we wouldn't be using it, but we could discuss more, you know, on a project basis.
Okay, thank you.
Well, follow up on the size of drainage area going into a reach. For the example where we divided our streams into separate reaches for assessment, would that hold, or would consider that for cumulative drainage area for the undivided stream? I don't know if I'm making sense. Yes.
Are you asking about the specific example?
Yes. So in that case, if we divide up the reach sections, how do we consider the total area and see if it's over 0.5 or?
No, for each individual reach, you would delineate the drainage area to about the center. And if it was greater than 0.5, then you would assess fish. So because this one was 0.9 square miles at the culvert and 0.6 at the upstream end of the tributary, all 5 of these reaches would assess fish.
Thank you.
And we're just creating a break there because when your drainage area increases, you know, your projected bankful width and dimensions are going to change, and the stream's just going to be a little different down there. So you'd want to create a reach break at that point.
I think that takes us to our lunch break. Was there anything in the chat that I could not see or cannot see.
I had a question, Sydney. I didn't put this in the chat, but if you could, sorry, I know you just stopped sharing. Can you go back to the slide that had it showed the floodplain and like the road break, the anthropogenic kind of
Yeah, active valley.
shrinking. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
So in this case, I just wanted to kind of clarify. So you said in this case you were kind of just kind of guessing based on that slope there. But I guess you wouldn't really know unless you had historical data or historical imagery whether that was, because in that scenario, that's like assuming like a fill, but it also could have been a cut, right? Like it could have been from the other angle, or more than likely it could have been a cut and fill, which would make the active valley bottom be somewhere more in the middle of where the anthropogenic terrace is. So is that, I just wanted to clarify, is that just like you have to look at the historical data and see for each case?
Yes. Yeah, so if you can get historical imagery that predates the development, then that is the preferred. Otherwise, you're left with reasonable assumptions of what the valley was, what the valley width, the active valley width might be.
Okay.
And as a
Okay, thanks.
comparison, you could also look at other drainages nearby, other streams nearby, and see kind of in the same geologic type setting, something of a similar size, what its valley looks like as a comparison as well, to help you determine whether you think that it had been filled or not. And sometimes you can auger down and figure out whether you're sitting on fill material, based on the soil profile and stuff, or not. So those are a couple tools.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
All right, so that takes us to lunch break, unless Sydney had anything else to add.
Nope.
All right, so yeah, we'll meet back. It's about noon. We'll meet back at 1 o'clock. And I'm just going to keep this open, and so y'all can stay logged in or not, whatever you want to do. And you can enter any other questions into the chat, and we can get back to them at 1 o'clock. So we'll see you guys in a bit.
Hey, Nick,
Yes.
if we log out during lunch, do we just go back to the same link that we came in on this morning?
Yes, it's the same link.